Hello everyone, this is your host Akhil Jabbar and welcome back to another episode of SaaS District. On today's episode, we'll be talking about the importance of the human experience, different growth strategies for enterprise clients, and building your marketing budget for your SaaS company. Today we have our guest Andy Mura joining us. Andy is an expert on marketing, business strategy, lead generation, digital transformation, user onboarding, and user experience. He's a marketer, he's a founder, he's a speaker and mentor with over 10 years of experience in the SaaS world. Andy's focus is on the human experience, which we'll talk about, which is making sure that companies invest the resources in creating a great employee experience to support successful change management that in turn leads to a better, enhanced customer experience. Over the past few years, Andy has been directly, both as a founder and head of marketing, and as a mentor with over 200 countries, both in North America and Europe. And he's now in charge of the marketing operations at ExB Group, which is an AI machine learning-driven natural language processing platform that provides cognitive process automation for the insurance industry. So welcome, Andy. Glad to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, for those who don't know who you are, would you mind please sharing a brief background about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, well, funny enough, everything started with my passion for music, actually. My dream was to become the best music producer ever. And I worked a little bit in the sector. And I actually, over time, I was responsible for promoting new artists, right? So that's where I first got in touch with marketing, advertising, and stuff like that. The product was not directly a software solution or an actual product. It was basically people, artists, and their music. And it was really, really good. I really enjoyed that. But as you know, the music industry, plummeted dramatically. So every month we would see a zero be removed from our budget, right? And after a while, it was basically impossible to do anything for newcomers and stuff like that because the budget would just be enough for printing a couple of flyers and that's it. Mm-hmm. And so it was time for me to change. And at that point in time, I met a friend of mine. Her name is Abigail. She introduced me to this guy. He was the CEO of an advertising agency. And this guy, Peter, super cool guy, he brought me into this world and taught me a lot. And indirectly, I learned a lot about, copywriting and classic advertising and digital marketing. And then, when you have a passion, you get more into it. And then I got my first job in marketing and learned more and more. I founded my own company. I worked with a company. I was in San Francisco. And at the same time, I had other projects. I sold a couple of companies and, and then I was hired as CMO or head of marketing or VP marketing at different companies, and that's it. It just happened.
Right?
I'm glad that it worked like that.
Cool. Yeah, we actually see that a lot from typically there's a couple of people who go into this role. One are engineers because they have a lot of that analytical background and data-driven mindset for marketing, and then you also have a lot of the creatives who I've seen come from the music industry, so such as yourself. So that's pretty cool.
Right.
What's your take on the, going back to today and the current environment with the COVID-19? What's your take on the current environment of the SaaS industry, or what have you seen specifically in Europe that's going on?
Yeah, obviously a lot of companies are worried for two main reasons, right? On the one hand, we see VC firms and or other investors, they are a lot more cautious when it comes to investing in companies. And on the other hand, we see that the whole pipeline generation kind of slows down dramatically. First of all, because many companies are on a hiatus, just temporarily closed, or because, for example, events are not an option anymore, and many other things that changed over time. And at the same time, larger companies or potential customers, again, they're also very cautious when it comes to purchasing new software. So we have this kind of no BS kind of situation in which everything which is not totally essential is not important anymore, right? In the past, companies would focus on, this software is absolutely vital, so we have to have it. And that's that could be good for, can optimize processes and stuff like that. Now it's not like that anymore, unless your solution is really essential, or unless you frame your solution, or you make your like potential customers understand that your solution is vital. Then it's really hard for companies and for SaaS companies. So on the one hand, you have less money from investors and more problems acquiring money or acquiring customers and generating profit. So it's quite problematic. As mentioned, I think it's a temporary situation. And most of the companies obviously have to find some cost-cutting measures or something like that to bridge this period. But once this whole thing is over, companies that are proving to be effective and efficient, they're going to thrive anyway. So it's just a very bad phase, but we're going to go through it.
Sure, yeah. So they're kind of at a standstill at the moment where, deciding, unless you're an absolute essential thing, they're not in the phase of testing out new products or, experimental phase, right? Just
not really.
Survival mode.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Because also budgets are reduced, and especially software, right? You keep reading articles about CIOs in large corporations like really limiting the amount of software solutions they invest in.
Yeah. So you've worked with different, size businesses, right? You've raised capital, I assumed. You've worked with funded companies. You've worked with founding your own companies. How do you advise SaaS companies to grow, and how do they manage their marketing when you're comparing those two scenarios where you're pre-investment, let's call it your early stage, you don't have outsourced capital and you're trying to be lean, versus now you have post-investment, you've got capital, you can grow. And what does that marketing strategy look like differently between those two stages?
Yeah, obviously, at the beginning, it's all about being smart, right? You don't have the funds to test different, hypotheses and stuff like that. So you really have to be smart and go for your low-hanging fruits. Usually, pre-marketing, like pre-funding marketing, is all about, brand awareness and low-hanging fruits in terms of like check your network, talk to the connections of your connections, try to find people who are willing to support you in terms like you have to generate these kind of champions willing to do something for you in the meantime that you actually have capital to grow more or less organically. And then, of course, invest a lot in your online presence, SEO, especially at the beginning. So do anything you can to just be found, because you probably won't have the resources, for example, for proper outbound campaigns, and you won't have resources for a proper content marketing campaign or inbound campaign, because that takes time, right? You need to create brand awareness and generate attention and traffic and interest. It takes time. So yes, you have to build that, but at the same time, you need to find quick ways to generate attention. And usually, events, speaking gigs, guest posts, write a lot. That's always my tip, because if you write a lot, then people will notice you and maybe invite you to events. And through events, you have this kind of face-to-face communication, which is super powerful. So it's mostly like really invest a lot in your personal brand and personal brand of your co-founders and people in marketing, and leverage this kind of traction at the beginning, because you don't have funds for proper advertising or but at the same time, I always compare that. It's funny because you have to imagine you have nowhere to live, right?
Yeah.
And you have to build two things at the same time. You need a little abode, something like a little place where you can actually live. But in the meantime, that you build your mansion. So your mansion is your future marketing strategy. And you have to start at some point, because you can't just say, inbound, it takes time, so we'll do it later. Because then you postpone again, right? It's like the same thing with compound interests. If you say, no, I don't invest now because I'm 25. Yeah, but you're losing all your, interest. And the same with inbound marketing. A lot of companies say, we don't invest in content marketing because the first 1 or 2 years, it doesn't yield any proper return on investment. True, might be true, depends how you do it. But at the same time, you have to start at some point, because then it's too late. So you have to build your little place where you can survive, and you don't want to be out in the rain, so you want to be covered.
Yeah.
and that's your temporary strategy. At the same time, already, create the foundations for your mansion, and which is your long-term strategy. So you have to do two things at the same time. So that's why it takes. It's a very strenuous process at the beginning for every startup.
Sure.
But it's critical.
Exactly.
And once you have the funds, then it's not anymore about being super smart with the resources you have or investing more time. So basically, money only buys you time, right? You can achieve the same results if you have money or not. There are plenty of examples in the SaaS industry. If you really solve a problem, very important problem for your target group, and you know exactly how to explain that and how to make it important, relevant, it doesn't really matter whether or not you have money. But money obviously buys you time, right? You can set up fancy automation. You can have more resources for advertising. You reach out to more people. But that's the same, you can do the same even without money before your funding investment, because you can create your own bots, right? There are solutions like Phantom Buster or something like that. Very cheap solutions. You can create automation in many different areas, or you can use, Zapier to create connections and automate. Careful not to go crazy and spread yourself too thin, because you say, okay, now I have money, I can do everything. I do social media here, I do YouTube campaigns and branding videos. No, you always have to be, to focus on what works and invest money so that your cost per leads and your return investment is pretty much constant. And that's also what investors want to see, obviously. Predictability, right? So you invest money. So money buys you speed. That's it.
Makes sense, yeah. And let's look at from, there's two different founders I usually find who we encounter. You have the SaaS companies who are very focused on lead generation, inbound, quick kind of sale, and focus on the sales and marketing, maybe less on their product. And then you have those product-led companies, right? And that's how they drive their growth, at least into a certain stage. What strategies do you suggest for SaaS companies that are focused on that side? So let's look at those two kind of polar opposites there.
Yeah, it all depends on your target group, right? In some specific industries and for certain company sizes, we might still, as well, we might be still like pretty much sales driven, right? Especially if we go to enterprise, B2B companies that target enterprise companies and stuff like that, or marketing driven for companies also that in B2B and stuff like that. Product-led works really well if your product is, so if you create internal champions. What do I mean by that? We all know they are decision makers in companies, right? But if your champions push for a specific solution, decision makers are likely to, favor your solution. So look at Slack, for example. Slack is something that pretty much grows internally. People love to use it, so they push for it. So obviously decision makers go for it. So in that case, it works if your end user is also your champion. So in some areas, it can work. For example, complicated ERP or CRM solutions that are used by a limited group of people and are extremely complicated can't have that kind of like product-led growth, because the people who use it are usually not the champions you want to have in a company. It might happen, especially in small. So if you target startups or smaller companies, look at Pipedrive, right? So sometimes you can have like to say demand internally, but that is usually the case for simpler solutions, which are very easy and to understand and use, so that people can have direct access to it. So they go right into it, like look at Monday, right? Just enter your email, start playing around. Obviously, you'll fall in love because the whole interface is so beautiful and everything works so well. So obviously, then you will talk to your head of department or something like that and say, hey, look what I found. It's very practical. Already created a dashboard just to test, and it works really well, right?
So this could be like a Salesforce, right? You're working on Salesforce and you just like realize how complicated and complex it is, and you're like, I'm gonna go try Pipedrive, and then you figure out a solution. You're like, hey, look, we can do this for half the price and super simple, and then you go out and show it to your boss and say, hey, can we try this? Okay.
Yeah, Salesforce grew pretty much like it turned into pretty much a enterprise solution, right? So it's because of the features they offer. It's a natural growth, right? That had many years. The same like Zendesk, right? It's funny, Zendesk didn't have a sales rep until they hit 10,000 customers, right? Wow. So it was completely like easy. Just try it, use it, and people loved it. And then when it became more complicated, now they offer so many different modules and solutions and products. Now it's a different story, obviously.
Got it. So depending on the complexity of your product, that's okay. Makes sense. And then we talked a little bit about the human experience. I know you're a big avid fan of that. Why is that human experience or user experience important? And what are some tips or strategies SaaS founders can follow to improve that or start implementing that thought into their culture?
Yeah, when we talk about human experience, we're talking, there are two different areas you need to tackle. On the one hand is employee experience. There are people, and there are people in your company. And then customer experience, obviously, who are the people you address. And obviously, they're directly related, right? You can't expect your employees to treat your customers nicely if they're not treated well, right? You can, your employees will be as nice to your customers as you are to them. So if you create a great employee experience, and if you take care of your people, and if you have a special climate, that kind of atmosphere of ownership, recognition, and cooperation, and positivity, and so on, and trust above all, then your employees will be more likely to focus on a great employee experience. And then you mentioned user experience. Yeah, user experience is a subset of the whole customer experience, right? So once your customer is an agent in your software solutions, they become a user. That's why, user, employee, customer, just human experience. The more digital we become, the more important it is to have experiences, to offer meaningful experiences that actually make sense, right? Think of B2C brands. They're really good at creating very powerful experiences, right? Every subscription-based model or based company in B2C, they're really good at establishing a direct relationship with their customers. And the same should happen in B2B, whereas you need to map the entire customer journey, and you need to experience it yourself. Eat your own dog food, right? I remember a company I worked at before, we had to use our own product, everybody in the company. It doesn't matter from finance, accounting to marketing, sales. Everybody had to use the product for 1 month or two or something like that and try to achieve results. If you had a problem, you had to contact support as if you were a customer. And you had to go through the whole support and ticketing system. And we had to write down everything that really annoyed us, from the software interface, which is something about user experience, to processes, to customer experience in terms of like support or how to schedule a call with your customer success manager, blah, 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 everything. And you map it, and then, that's your internal testing. But you also need to collect feedback from existing customers out there and map everything on your customer journey map and see everything and try to see where, small changes can make a big difference.
Right.
And start from there, and start always with 2 or 3 initiatives, obviously, and quickly improve every step of the customer journey so that you have basically no friction, right? Think of Amazon or companies like that, right? They're really good. They remove friction. They reduce, for example, a fear of commitment by saying, yeah, don't worry, you have 3 pages before you purchase. And once you purchase, don't worry, you can send it back. You see, and to send it back, don't worry, we already have a tag for you. Just stick in. They make it so easy, and you have to imagine the same thing should happen to create a great customer experience also for software companies, right? In SaaS, it's the same thing. Monitor, really map, have little emojis, and check where people might experience fear, or insecurity, or they have doubts, or they fear commitment, or say, especially in user experience, right? If you say, a lot of people are afraid of making mistakes in software, right? Because some process, they think processes are not reversible. Just make it clear. Don't worry. Try it. Test it. You can always go back, right?
Exactly.
Think of Canva. You can do whatever you want. You can always undo, go back. You always save your um, your products, your drawings and stuff like that. So everything is there. And if you create that kind of like trust and security, that's how you can really have like a smooth customer experience throughout the journey, which is what we define as a human experience. And it starts with marketing, right? Because usually the first touch point with a brand is marketing through ads, through content, or whatever, right? Look at what you guys are doing with this podcast. This might be the first touch point with your brand.
True.
And everything starts with marketing and then moves on to sales and customer success and then support. And you have to make sure you have the same experience throughout the journey. So if your company is famous for being friendly, you need to have a friendly experience throughout the journey. Playful, the whole experience needs to be playful. If you are super serious, and that also has to reflect throughout the whole customer journey. It depends on your brand's identity. And consider every touch point like something that you can't erase. So it's like an inception, right? It's a seed you plant.
Right.
And try. So it's what companies need to avoid is regretting that little touch point they had with a potential customer.
Makes sense. Yeah, it reminds me very similar. So when you're talking about user experience, it's very similar to like growth experimentation. So for example, when I was talking to Amelia at Growth Hackers, she was saying on average, they look at the data, 75% of growth experiments fail. And I think that's the idea is like you have to be okay and have that trust and accept the fact that you're going to do these user experience tests, but they're going to fail. Most of them will, but it's okay that as long as the 25% do pan out and makes it worthwhile. And then the other part of that is I was listening to an interview with I think he's a billionaire in real estate and different things. And what his key takeaway was focusing on that 5%. And a lot of people don't, so 95%, it looks good. Everything's fine. What do you mean? It's easy. People can sign up, they can pay. But when you start really focusing on that little 5% of improvement every day, just keep, micro picking those little things that, okay, but it's difficult for me to return this package. I have to, go to the post office. I have to, pay for the shipping versus like, okay, let's just make it as simple as possible. Don't worry about it, which you talked about, right? And just those little things. And that's what it is. It's those little things that add up, right?
Correct. Marginal growth.
Yeah, exactly. I want to talk about the hiring process. So now you're talking about your team setting the standard and they're the foundation of what leads to the user experience. Do you have a process you can share on how you define and build your marketing team so that they can keep maintaining that human experience at a high level?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, it all starts with choosing what kind of like specialists you want to have in your team, right? You always have to have this mix of people who are generalists and more specialists. And it all boils down from collecting data, as always, right? Data. So you just need a track record. You have to look back and see what worked in the past, right? So in marketing, there are so many things you can do, right? You have account-based marketing, you have outbound activities, you have performance marketing, social media marketing, influencer marketing, search engine marketing. So there are so many different things and events and so on. So monitor and track every channel to see what works. And then obviously, at the beginning, it's usually there's one person responsible for everything, right? And then it's your chance to grow by hiring specialists who are better than you in a specific area. So if you see, okay, we attract lots of traffic through our content, find a great content marketing manager who is 10 times better than you. And at the same time, you see, organic traffic converts 10 times better than any other kind of traffic. well, look for an SEO expert. Even better if you can find a person who is content manager and also good at technical SEO, right?
True.
And so on and so on. Or if you see, every time we go to events, we come home with hundreds of leads. Well, get the best event manager out there and put them like 24/7 on, and that's the kind of like process you go through to define what people you need. In some cases, it's always worth checking, outsourcing, working with agencies versus, doing things internally with pros and cons, which is obviously that's clear, right? How much you have control over something, plus the time and so on, costs. But so if you combine, okay, what activities are really worth investing in, and ROI calculation, outsourcing versus hiring, and then I'm usually a fan of hiring basically because, once you have your people inside, they also grow with you and with your company culture. So it always takes less time and effort to manage people internally than agencies, right? You know that because briefing and stuff like that. So it's always better, but it's always a matter of choice. And then the main point is always finding somebody who's really good at something much, much, much better than you, right? So you might leave the team, but you have to find somebody who is 10 times better than you. And then you have to make sure, of course, there's alignment in terms of what objectives we want to achieve, and that their performance is also always connected to specific indicators so that you make sure, okay, we're going in the right direction.
And what are some of those important, KPIs or metrics you guys use to measure team performance, including measuring human experience? Do you tie it back to that, or do you just keep it strictly at this is your metrics that you need to hit?
Well, well, in a certain way. So everything you do in marketing should go back to MRR. So everything else is just vanity metrics, right? So if I have, for example, a content marketing specialist that comes to me and say, hey, we had 500 great leads last night for our webinar, right? We had like 500 opt-ins, all great. And you check, it's a bunch of Gmail accounts. And how many of those are, turning into customers? Well, none. So failure, right? 500 opt-ins, that's just a vanity metric. So go 3 steps lower and check how much time did you invest in organizing a webinar, for example. How much do you invest in terms of promotion? How many people participated in the event? And of those, how many became trial users? And of those, how many customers? So everything goes down to MRR. So the only, if you want to, the only metric for marketing should be MRR. And it's impossible to generate MRR if you don't focus on a great human experience, right? So the byproduct of offering a great human experience, this kind of long-term relationship with your subscribers, don't forget we're in SaaS, right? It's not like in the old world you had like, okay, you come to my car dealership, you check a car, you like it, you buy it, bye. I'll never see you again. So I can sell you a lemon. I don't care. You're away. We'll never meet, right?
Sure.
But now we create relationships, long-term relationships. The idea is having because lead generation is expensive. Customer acquisition is expensive. So once we have a customer, we want to have a long-term relationship based on trust and value and support. So it's impossible to generate MRR if you don't generate a great human experience, because the subscriber is at the center of your product. We are in a continuous relationship, month after month. And if for some reason a customer is not happy, they just simply unsubscribe. Bye-bye. And all the money invested in lead gen is gone. So exactly. That's why MRR is the byproduct and is the only thing you can use to measure how effective something is. Obviously, then you can break it down, MRR, and then you can check lifetime value and you can check cost per lead to define how effective something was. But as a matter of fact, your event manager should always have like figures ready. How much do we invest in that event? How many leads did we bring home? How many of those leads actually converted? And then we want to have an easy calculation of cost per lead for events. and for social media and influencer marketing and performance marketing. Everything you do should be connected to MRR. Not always easy. Why? Because some marketing activities are not lead gen activities, right? Especially if you're generating thought leadership, brand awareness, especially at the beginning, you invest a lot of money in brand value, which is kind of hard to monitor.
Exactly.
But you can, right? As soon as you see mentions of your company, you see how many mentions you get. You can use tools like Brand24, Mention.com, whatever you want to use. As soon as you see people talk about you on social media, they write about you in blog posts, and or you have a lot of direct traffic, which is also interesting. Well, depends if you monitor it correctly, let's say.
Right.
And then if you have actual direct traffic, these are people, like, for example, you would never, or well, some people would do, but most of the people would never search Apple in Google, right? You know how to get to Apple.
Sure.
So, and if you see that kind of like behavior, you see it's still return on investment because you're generating, brand awareness.
Right.
And altogether, it has to have an effect on MRR. So, period.
Yeah, the tough part though there is, like, you talked about two things. One is like SEO, right? When you're first starting off, like you said, 6 months to a year before you start seeing that. This podcast, for example, you're building a brand, you're building these relationships. We don't see MRR on this, right? We have, podcast producer, sound engineer, setting up all the equipment. You're investing all this time, obviously setting this up, taking your time, invest. So you add all those up, you won't see this until, 6 months down a year. So how, you could, put it back to some kind of metric, add all those costs up and say, okay, at some point, but then how do you, especially those longer term ones versus, PPC or ads or performance, how do you kind of set that tone? Do you go back down to say, okay, views, subscribers, engagement, shares, and then, based off that, let's see if somebody reaches out and becomes a lead at some point, and then track it at that point?
Yeah, it's always about smart goals, right? And realistic goals. If you say, okay, I'm going to start a blog today, and by end of July, so in a month or 2 months or something like that, I want to have 1,000 leads a day that come through the blog, I'm going to start laughing, right? Not going to happen in 2 months.
Sure.
So it's about smart goals, like this podcast, right? Set a blueprint at the beginning of the campaign, and you say, okay, we want to test this. We think it's a great, solution to generate awareness and interest and stuff like that. So let's define some metrics in terms of MRR and a timeline. And you say, okay, that's exactly what we're talking about. The little house you have to build because you don't want to get wet in the rain, but at the same time, check your mansion and carry out this as an experiment. But you have to be also honest. And unfortunately, sometimes it's really hard. You know that, right? The more you invest in something, the more difficult it is to stop. And at some point, you have to collect those that we call like micrometrics, as you said, views and number of shares. If you don't see growth already in those micrometrics at the beginning, it's really unlikely that eventually you will also generate, MRR. But if you see constant growth in terms of like, for example, it's a blog, right? 30 readers, probably at the beginning you will have 30 readers, but then they become 80, 200, 500, 1,000, 10,000 per article. Then if you see that, then, okay, you say, okay, I know we're going in the right direction. Now it's only about, okay, how do we convert this traffic? And because maybe we don't have, the right tools. But yeah, definitely, you need Makes to sense. Have some indicators at the beginning that you're going in the right direction. And in your blueprint, always define time. That's always a parameter. You say, if nothing, happens within the next 8 to 10 months, maybe our audience is not a blog reading audience or not a podcast listening audience. You never know, right?
Exactly. So it's all an experience.
It's hard sometimes to admit.
Sure, yeah. And then, off of that, how do you set up effective marketing budgets? I think that's super important because you can spend all this money. Say, I'm going to do blogging, I'm going to do this podcast, I'm going to spend a lot of money, but then it doesn't go back to MRR. How do you be super effective? And what is the right number? Is it 5%, 10% of your revenue? Is it 80% at the beginning and then you slowly taper it down? How do you set it up? I'm curious.
Well, as a marketer, I would say 80% of your budget should go to marketing.
Sure, yeah.
Because
We'd love
sometimes,
that, right?
yeah, when your CEO comes to you and say, hey, you're spending a lot of money. And you say, I'm not spending money. I'm creating value, right? So
Exactly.
I'm generating brand value. Again, think of Apple. How much is the logo worth? Just the word, their brands. Yeah. So of course they invested a lot of money into that brand name and brand equity, but still, you have a direct return on investment. So, but obviously for SaaS companies, it doesn't work like that. I mean, brand recognition still has a value, but not when investors decide to buy in, stuff like that. So the idea is every, you have different stages, right? You have the Wild Wild West stage in SaaS, which means anybody can be a customer. I don't care. Just come in, and you have super high churn because you just want to, generate traction in some way. And then you become more and more selective, and you get your right customer persona. You understand what customers actually benefit from, your solution or can be super successful. And the more at the beginning you have this growth stage, so obviously it's okay if 15, 20, 25% goes into your marketing activities, and you then again you have to define how to subdivide that budget. Again, the more data you have, the easier it is to see where is the lowest cost per lead. But it's not only about cost, right? It's about quality, lead quality, right?
Mm-hmm.
True. Maybe you can say, hey, our Instagram campaign generated leads like $20 a lead. Awesome. But they're all maybe leads that churn quickly. They're not really interested. Maybe people just willing to experiment or something like that. Yes, it was really cheap. And marketing is saying, I did my job. I created the leads. But that's not the whole story, right? There might be another channel. You say, yeah, we're spending $80 per lead instead of 20, but look, the customer lifetime value of those leads is 2 years or something like that. At the beginning, you don't have that kind of data, but you can see a trend, and you say, okay, more expensive leads but higher return on investment with lifetime value, or cheap leads but that will never be a perfect match for our company. Mm-hmm. So it's always that kind of like research you have to do, and always collecting data, and always trying to connect specifically. And I know one of the pain points for marketers obviously is, yeah, but how do I know that, right? Because of course you have aggregate data, 200 leads converted this month through organic search, for example, and 200 through, for example, PPC, and 300 there, but it's hard to pinpoint, but who exactly? Right. So that's why the biggest investment you can do at the beginning is really invest in resources that allow you to really connect each campaign to a specific lead. And you can start from proper UTM, parameters.
Yeah.
Tracking, you need a tracking code on your website. Registration form, you need to not only register the lead, but also see the UTM parameters directly in your CRM, because then you can see where they come from. You can say, okay, all the customers, whoa, look at that. 80% of the customers we generated this month, they came from a campaign we ran 2 months ago on, for example, TikTok. No idea. And you realize, okay, how effective it is, right? And then you check, and of those, well, almost 60% were customers that renewed their contract continuously. So you always go backwards to this kind of investigation. So UTM parameters, of course, and also track those. So make sure you have a proper script on your side to monitor that. Or once you grow a little bit, invest in solutions like Dream Data or something like that allows you really to pinpoint where every customer came from, and you can build the customer journey backwards, right? You can see, okay, they saw an ad on YouTube 3 months later, but they were retargeted, or 3 weeks later, or 3 days later were retargeted on Facebook, but then they actually did a Google search, and it's not Google that created that lead. It's actually the whole journey, right? And so once you identify what journey seems to work best, and in terms of lead quantity, but quality also, then that's where you double down. But last thing, I don't want to say too much, but there's one real problem. Sometimes marketers think, oh, okay, the last touch point was, for example, Facebook. So let me invest everything in Facebook and block everything else. And then you realize, okay, we blocked our Google Display Network campaign or our Twitter campaign, and the Facebook campaign doesn't work anymore. So that's a mistake that a lot of marketers make, right? As soon as they see, oh my God, I generated so many leads through Facebook, this Facebook campaign, let's put $25,000 on top. And then it doesn't work because you stop all the rest. So sometimes campaigns that seem, okay, they don't work, they actually do work indirectly by supporting the campaign that then provides the last touch points. So again, it's experimenting a lot. It's the same in your WordPress installation. If something goes wrong, what do? You start, I don't know, you check all the plugins and you deactivate each plugin once, right?
Yeah.
And say, okay, now it's back to normal. So you identify the problem. Same with your campaigns. Yeah, okay, try and block stop your Twitter campaign. It's okay. If you see that then other campaigns don't perform as well, it means there's some kind of correlation that you cannot even notice, and you're breaking the path because it's a multi-touch path.
Exactly.
So don't invest in a tool or in a channel. Invest in a path that works, and ignore all those tools and channels that don't lead to any return on investment.
Makes sense. Yeah, and that is a challenge. What was that tool you mentioned that can track it? Because I can see that, for example, Andy shows up on our podcast. Somebody's going to go into our YouTube channel. Then they're going to go Google your company. Or they're going to check out your LinkedIn page, and then from your LinkedIn, they're going to go to your website. But what you're going to see is, social media referral from LinkedIn. And you'll say, yeah, I'm going to go into LinkedIn, but really came, indirectly through the podcast, right? What was that tool you mentioned? I think that kind of...
you can use Dream Data. We
Data, okay.
used that in the past, was quite successful.
Cool.
Oribi partially can provide that kind of information. Oribi is like Google Analytics on steroids.
Cool.
But again, you still have mostly aggregate data.
Yeah.
So you can do the same with a combination of UTM tracking and analytics, or you can have like more granular solutions that actually tag specific people and follow them throughout the whole journey.
Cool. Well,
not always cheap solutions, unfortunately, but necessary.
Sure, yeah. At some point, it makes a difference, though. Companies so we talked about product led versus sales led. Now trial to paid, SMB focus, enterprise focus. So two separate solutions. We kind of touched on that. What does this strategy look like for those two types of SaaS companies?
Yeah, of course. If you target SMBs and startups, you actually have a real trial to paid conversion, right? So you can be low touch or high touch in terms of onboarding, but no matter what, you have that kind of process in which usually the decision maker is one person or maybe two people, but they all test your software and then they decide internally. Obviously, there are 1 million things you can do to facilitate the process with a great user experience, great onboarding experience, with checklists, with support, with walkthroughs or something like that, something to make the whole, onboarding faster. And you have to, lead your trial users to that aha moment where they actually achieve something and they understand what value they can get from your solution as fast as possible. And then you have to activate those users, right? Think of lead feeder, for example. Every time you do something in the software, they send you an email and say, hey, congrats, you tested that feature. But you can also do A, B, C, and D, and E with that. Oh, no, I didn't know that. So they activate, they create engagements. They want to in the product as much as possible. And, lots of solutions like that out there. Gusto, they have great onboarding emails and stuff like that. So very good examples out there of the whole onboarding and trial period experience. In some cases, you have like a lead qualification. You will see, like, for example, lots of SaaS companies, they also ask you to fill out your company profile, not only because they customize the experience, but they also pre-qualify you. As soon
Yes.
as you say, yeah, we are 300 to 500 people in our company, and we're based here and there, we do this and that, and they say, okay, that's exactly the ideal customer profile. So immediately there's automation in place that sends you, you receive an email and say, you have already a dedicated customer success manager. Well, I'm a trial user. Doesn't matter, because it's worth investing, right? So you can't do that for every single trial user. Imagine you have thousands of trials in parallel. You can't have one dedicated person for every trial user, or for 100 accounts or something like that. Still too much, because you also have your existing customers. So what they do is they select some people, and they obviously make sure that the whole trial to paid is as successful as possible. And if you monitor what's going on in your product, how many times people return back, how much time they spend, how many onboarding tasks they completed, how many features or key features people have used. If you monitor, again, data-driven. If you monitor everything, then you have like this kind of classic traffic light system in your customer success management solution. You know what customers are dormant, need to be activated, what customers are super active, and what customers are potentially key accounts. And then you have different processes and strategies. You need your playbooks, you need your all your tactics. And that's more like SMBs and startups.
Right.
If you target enterprise customers, you're not going to have 1,000 trials a month, because there are not even 1,000 companies out there.
Sure.
Yeah, there are 2,000 larger enterprise companies in North America, right? So you're not going to have them all in a month. So every customer is, super high touch onboarding. And in that case, you don't have a decision maker, you have a decision making unit, which is usually made of 8 to 10 to 12 people in different departments, from finance to legal departments to, even the union sometimes wants to see what kind of software I'm installing, are you monitoring my employees, everything is, you have so many different people and stakeholders involved in the decision-making process. You can't have them all within your software and onboard them to show, because they are not going to be the end users anyway. They don't care.
Yeah.
So the whole thing usually turns into a POC, a proof of concept, in which you are usually assigned a specific task, and usually they test in an RFP or something like that. It might even test different solutions, right? So you're competing against, and especially it's true for example, in our sector, in natural language processing and artificial intelligence, what large corporations do, they usually actually give you a task. It's really a challenge. They say, we assign you this task and we expect 93% accuracy. If you comply, you go on to the next stage. It's like American Idol, right?
Okay.
and it's pretty cool. And then, your product has to be, you have to convince with your product, and you have to carry out the whole, proof of concept with your solution architects and with people who actually manage the whole implementation, something like that. Having said that, I know that sounds pretty much like 2010, because what we've seen of like past 10 years is, migration to the cloud and stuff like that. We notice there's a little bit of decentralization right now. So what happens is, in the past, you always had like IT services in a large corporation. They will be responsible, like they will be the gate deciding what, software comes in or not. Right now, head of departments are given a lot more authority. And so this change is kind of positive. So again, it's like a micro SMB within your company. So again, if you sell a CRM solution, your sales department becomes a little bit like an SMB within the company. You can kind of address as if it was an SMB. So you kind of have the chance to provide a try to paid classic conversion journey, maybe a lot more high touch, right, with support and everything, but still. So right now it's that phase in which we still see a lot more of the old, sales cycle in enterprise companies.
Yeah.
But we also witness some change, which is positive change. Again, at the end, though, you still have to comply with, legal and regulatory problems. So you will still have to go through the whole procurement process. And in some industries, it's hell.
Yeah.
For example, automotive and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
They are known for, but once you break that barrier, you're listed, right? And if you're listed as one of the providers, then all the other departments can actually acquire your solution and or subsidiaries in different parts of the world. And then you can sit back and relax because, once of course, it's a lot of work. You get into GE or something like that. Oh my God, so much work. But then suddenly, you pop up in different areas, different sectors, different use cases. And it's, this kind of land and expand kind of like strategy. It pays off again in the long run. At the beginning, it's just hell.
Yeah, exactly. I want to touch base a little bit more on the enterprise side. Yeah, I remember when I was, I think, in Barcelona, and we were talking with a enterprise startup at the time. We were talking to the innovation department there, right? And that's what they said, right? It's like, okay, like you have a chance to build this. We want to do a proof of concept with our small department, very small test. But if you guys do well, like, we're going to open the doors for you for the rest of this, and then you're good. But you have to make sure that first kind of test, and you guys are prepared for that. So I think that's super important.
Fail.
Don't fail, yeah. And make sure
Lots
you know
of
what
pressure.
you're doing. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, yeah. On enterprise, so I think, a lot of that, there is the inbound side, but I think, you have to focus a lot more outbound, high touch, building relationships. What is the typical sales cycle you guys are seeing in, Europe or wherever you've kind of worked? And what are some ways you can try to shorten that? Because we understand enterprise sales is long. It takes a while for decision makers and all those people to finally write the check. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, the problem is, as you mentioned, is always in the decision-making unit, right? Sometimes I've seen that also in the past. You go as far as getting to the C-level, everybody approved everything, and then the C-level blocks the whole project. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes the other way around. The C-level is super convinced that they want to work with you, and then you go back and you go down 2 or 3 levels, and then they say, we have this regulatory problem, but we're not willing to solve that now, so you know what, we don't want to invest energy and time. So they want, so the main problem with enterprise companies, in terms of lead generation, obviously, it's all about ABM right now. So account-based marketing. So really take your people and imagine these people are like key account managers, but before people are actually customers, and they only work for their 10 to 20 assigned 10 to 20 dream accounts, right? And make sure they have all the tools, which means assets and opportunities, to generate multiple touch points with a customer, right? Okay. In terms of support, events, webinars, papers, whatever you want. It really depends how you create your journey, but to make sure that you provide value before they even are customers, and also trust. And every person in your team in account-based marketing should be really focusing only on those companies, follow them on events, and talk to them in different situations. Make sure they see your content. This programmatic sales, display campaigns, everything, to make sure you flirt with them. Right?
Okay, sure.
It's basically flirting, and once you're and finally you have your first talk, well, the idea is try to identify beforehand your decision-making units. But that's a mistake. I've seen it so often. Salespeople, the first thing they do on the phone is say, okay, who do you think we should involve to make things move fast, right? Well, the person you're talking to, they don't know it, because they never usually, people usually don't purchase software like in startups, right? In every startup, that, right? So you have 80 software solutions for every department, and usually the head of the department just, okay, I want to test this and try this. So there's an internal process. Enterprise companies purchase new software every blue moon, right? So once every blue moon. So it's not like a process they are familiar with. So you can't have somebody on the phone and say, who do I need to involve to move on to the next step? They don't know. So you have to do the research, do your job, check what other companies did, and offer some solutions and tell them, look, according to my experience, I saw in the past, we also had to talk to the head of finance, this person, the process owner, and the head of the department. And what do you think? Can we involve them? Oh, sure. In that case, if you offer the solution, it's much easier. People are not going to work for you. They don't care, right? Why should I invest my time in making your life easier. I'm not
True.
earning anything.
Exactly.
So do your job. Don't expect people to do the job for you. So you do your research and already involve the people you think will need to be at the table once you actually organize a meeting, because you don't want to organize 12 meetings, especially in areas like in Europe where you have like especially imagine in Germany you have 23 days of like public holidays a year, 23 plus people have 30 days of paid vacation a year. So if you start having 12 meetings with people and trying to find when they're at work and everybody, so I've experienced that in the past. It might take 2 years just to have all the meetings. I'm not joking.
Wow.
It happened to me with a supermarket here in Germany. We were selling a specific solution. It took over 2 years just to talk to all the people involved in the decision-making process because it was impossible to find them. So the idea is bring everybody together as soon as you can, and you decide who should be there. And then they might also have other people in mind. And so this kind of cooperation, that shortens the sales cycle dramatically, because then you don't need to repeat things 10 times. And then have product documentation, everything. Try to foresee what they might want to have, right? Obviously, they want to have everything about your certification and security standards, and they want to see everything about APIs and everything you do, right? They're very careful where they put in their system. Security, data blindness, everything should be already there, because they shouldn't chase you and say, we need this, we need that. Provide everything in a digestible form. And if there are things that are recurring, so if you notice every time we have a conversation with a customer, they always come up with a question, but what integrations do you offer? And you don't have any material, inform marketing, right? And then marketing will create proper materials to also present integrations because it's necessary.
Sure.
So you shorten the time if you do your homework. Be prepared. Imagine what objections they might have. Proactively address objections in your documentation and content. Educate them even before you meet with them. Have videos. Simple. You have no idea. Simple Loom videos. They work magic. Just you are a sales, right? You are a solution architect. You are a business development manager. You know how to talk to your people, and do that. Like film yourself, show some slides, or show your product. Explain things before the meeting, so that once you get there, now it's about are there any objections we didn't foresee? And it always, because every company is a different organism and they have different internal regulations and problems and compliance issues and processes. So you're always going to find something new, but at least you covered 90% of what you would have covered in the meeting before the meeting, and people are well prepared. Make sure they also check your documentation, which means don't create a 200-page report because you're sure they're not going to do it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Put everything down into slides, charts, and mini videos, like 3 minutes.
Okay.
And then people will come to the meeting prepared, and then we can just start negotiating. Or we start planning the POC. We can start setting some metrics. What do you want to achieve? How we can support you, and what we need to do to convince you. It's a different, it's a different, you already covered some ground, and you can start like a discussion not from zero, because what always happens is every time you talk to a new stakeholder, you still have to explain everything from Adam and Eve.
Exactly.
Yeah, our solution does this, and no, don't do that.
Got it.
That's a big problem.
Makes sense. Wow, this has been a fantastic interview. Learned a lot from you, Andy. Thank you so much. Really appreciate this. Where can our audience get in touch with you if they want to learn more about what you do? I know you do a lot of consulting and you work with advisory with a lot of startups as well. How can they get in touch with you? Yeah, well, the best thing is just feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and just send a direct message. I'm always happy to chit chat, support, promote, co-promote everything. I'm always open to, I'm happy to help. And if we can work together in different areas, partner on different initiatives, happy to do so. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Andy, and thanks again. Thank you so much for having me. Cheers. Take care. Thank you all for listening in to today's episode. Don't forget to join us for another episode where we interview top leaders and experts in the business and SaaS industry. If you enjoyed this episode, I ask that you please give us a 5-star review on iTunes. That would be really, really appreciated. Otherwise, if you have any feedback, suggestions, or improvements for this podcast, please feel free to send it directly to me on our website at horizoncapital.com. Or you can just tweet me at Akil Jabbar. Thanks again, and hope to see you guys on the next episode.